At 11 o'clock that night, the front door opened so suddenly that I looked up from my book. I wasn't expecting anyone. My husband, Edward, was already upstairs taking his evening medication, and the house had been quiet for almost an hour. Then I heard luggage wheels rolling across the marble floor. I stepped into the hallway. Sophia stood there, my husband's daughter. She had 2 enormous suitcases beside her, and her husband, Daniel, was standing behind her with the uncomfortable expression of a man who already regretted agreeing to whatever had brought him there. Sophia looked exhausted, not sleepy. Exhausted in the way people look when they've been carrying anger for so long that it has become part of their personality. Her eyes moved over me, then over the house, then back to me. Dad said, "We're moving in." I blinked. Moving in. For a while, Daniel cleared his throat. "I'm sorry about the hour, Claire." Sophia ignored him. Instead, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She walked toward me and placed it in my hand. "These are the house rules." I unfolded the paper. Breakfast at 6. No greasy food. Fresh sheets every week. Bathroom scrubbed every night. Her clothes hand-washed. Coffee prepared exactly the way she liked it. Her bedroom cleaned every morning. I kept reading. At the bottom, one sentence had been underlined. "Since you're living off my father's money anyway, you might as well earn your keep." I slowly looked up. Sophia folded her arms. "I don't expect perfection." Daniel looked at the floor. I could tell he was embarrassed. Sophia continued, "I just expect you to remember that this is my father's house." I glanced around. The house had belonged to Edward long before I met him. I had never asked for it. I had never asked him for his money either. But I didn't defend myself. I looked at Sophia. "Is that everything?" She frowned. "What?" "The list." "Yes." I folded it neatly. "Okay." She stared at me. "Okay." I nodded. "Your room is ready." For a second, she looked almost disappointed. I think she had expected me to argue. Maybe she wanted me to complain to Edward. Maybe she wanted tears. Instead, I picked up one of her suitcases. "Come on." Daniel quietly whispered, "Thank you." Sophia followed me upstairs. I showed them the guest suite. She walked inside without saying good night. The door closed. I stood alone in the hallway. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding. I wasn't angry. I was wondering how much pain someone had to carry before kindness started looking like weakness. The next morning, I woke before 5. I'd always been an early riser. By 6, breakfast was ready. Eggs, fresh fruit, toast, turkey sausage, coffee for Edward, tea for me, and coffee for Sophia, exactly the way she'd requested. When she came downstairs, she looked surprised. She had probably expected to find me waiting nervously for instructions. Instead, I was putting strawberries into a bowl. "There isn't any peanut butter," I said. She stopped. "What?" "Your father told me you're allergic." She stared at me. "I am." "I know." She sat down. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Edward finally came downstairs. He smiled when he saw his daughter. "Sophia." "Dad." There was something awkward between them. Edward tried to hide it. I couldn't. He had waited almost 8 months for her to come home. And now that she was sitting across from him, he didn't seem to know what to say. I quietly cleared the dishes after breakfast. Later, Edward found me on the back porch. He brought 2 mugs. "Your tea." I smiled. "And your coffee?" He lifted his mug. "Right here." We sat together. For a while, we simply listened to the birds. Then Edward asked me about the novel I was reading. I laughed. "You've been waiting all morning to ask me that, haven't you?" He smiled. Inside the house, Sophia stood near the kitchen window. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her father, watching him laugh, watching him relax, watching the man she had spent years believing was emotionally unavailable look completely at peace. And I suddenly wondered whether she hated me, or whether she simply didn't understand me. The truth was, Edward and I hadn't planned to fall in love. 2 years before our marriage, I had been living a very ordinary life in Charlotte. I worked at the public library. On Saturdays, I volunteered with children. Twice a month, I cooked lunch at a local home for foster children. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. Edward first caught my attention because of a book. Every Tuesday, he would sit in the same leather chair near the history shelves. Always alone, always reading. One afternoon, I walked past him and noticed the same worn paperback in his hands. "You've read that 3 times," I said. He looked up. "My wife loved it." There was no bitterness in his voice, only love. Reading it again makes me feel like she's still here arguing with me about the ending. I smiled. Did she usually win? Always. That was our first conversation. 10 minutes. Nothing more. Weeks later, I was volunteering at a children's home when I saw him again. He was unloading boxes of groceries from a charity truck. He saw me, smiled, waved, and continued working. Later, I learned that Edward's Foundation donated to the home every month. I saw him again at a book festival, then at a food bank, then at a literacy fundraiser. Eventually, I laughed. Either Charlotte is the smallest city in America, or you keep following me. He smiled. I was about to accuse you of the same thing. Neither of us was following the other. We simply kept appearing in places where people were trying to make someone else's life better. That was what first attracted me to him. Not his money, not his company, not his beautiful home, his kindness. Months later, he asked me to dinner. It wasn't at an expensive restaurant. It was a small family-owned place outside Matthews. Halfway through dessert, he admitted something that made me laugh. "I almost didn't ask you." "Why?" "I thought you might think I'm too old." I smiled. "Edward, I'm 52. You're 68. He laughed. "We're both old enough to know that good conversations don't happen every day." Then he took my hand. "I've spent 20 years learning how to live without someone beside me," he said. "But I've realized something." "What?" "Living without loneliness isn't the same as living alone." That was the beginning. No fireworks, no grand speeches, just 2 people who had experienced enough loss to recognize peace when they found it. But there was one person who never welcomed our relationship. Sophia. Edward had told me about her early on. Her mother, Linda, had died when Sophia was 15. Edward had spent years trying to compensate for his absence by giving her everything money could buy. But money couldn't replace him. He worked constantly. Meetings, airplanes, construction sites, business dinners. He told himself he was building a future for his daughter. By the time he realized she had needed him more than his money, she was already grown. "I failed her," he told me once. I shook my head. "You loved her." "I did." "You still do." "I know." "Then don't stop now." After we married, Edward never spoke badly about Sophia, even when she was difficult, even when she ignored him. He always defended her. "She got stubbornness from me," he'd joke. Then one evening Sophia called. She and Daniel were in financial trouble. Daniel had lost his job. Her interior design business had collapsed after 2 major clients canceled their contracts. Their debts were growing. Edward didn't hesitate. "Come home." Sophia agreed. I thought it was a second chance. I thought she was finally ready to reconnect with her father. I was wrong. The first week was filled with small attacks. She would order me to do things. She would criticize the food. She would complain about the house. She would become cold whenever Edward and I laughed together. One afternoon, she handed me a pile of clothes. "These need to be washed by hand." I examined the fabric. "The silk blouse does." She frowned. "And the rest?" "The cotton shirts can go into the washing machine." "I told you to hand wash everything." "I heard you." "Then why didn't you?" "Because the washing machine was invented for a reason." She stared at me. "You didn't do exactly what I asked." "No," I said calmly. "I did what made sense." Daniel had been standing nearby. After Sophia walked away, he looked at me. "I honestly don't know how you stay this calm." I smiled. "Practice." But the truth was, I wasn't trying to win Sophia over. I simply refused to become someone I wasn't. She watched me closely, and slowly, she began noticing things she couldn't explain. I never asked Edward for money. I never changed my lifestyle because of his wealth. I continued working. I volunteered. I cooked for children. I helped strangers. And I never once complained about her. One Saturday, Sophia found me packing a casserole. "Where are you going?" "St. Mary's." Again. "The children are expecting lasagna." She frowned. "You actually spend your weekends doing that?" "I enjoy it." She looked at me as if she couldn't understand why anyone would volunteer without receiving something in return. That afternoon, Daniel lost his wallet. He searched everywhere. His credit cards were inside. Cash. Family photographs. Everything. I suddenly remembered finding it near the driveway. I brought it to him. He stared at me. "You found this earlier?" "Yes." "You didn't open it?" "No." Everything was still inside. Nothing had been touched. Sophia watched. She said nothing. That evening, Edward and I sat on the back porch. He asked me a question. "Were you hurt by what Sophia said that first night?" I shook my head. "Not really. Not even a little." I smiled. "Every time she gets angry, I don't see an angry woman." He waited. "I see a frightened child." Edward looked down. "I think she's still 15. He sighed. "That wound is probably my fault." I reached for his hand. "You loved her. You just didn't understand what she needed." "What if it's too late?" "It isn't." "How do you know?" "Because love doesn't have an expiration date." Neither of us noticed the bedroom window upstairs. Sophia was standing behind it. She had heard everything. She never mentioned it. But after that night, something changed. The insults became less frequent. The demands became quieter. One afternoon, I found her sitting alone at the kitchen island. She had 3 cups of coffee beside her. I placed chamomile tea next to her. I didn't ask for tea. "I know." She looked at me. "I noticed you've had 3 coffees." "So?" "You get headaches after the 3rd. Her hand automatically moved toward her temple. She stopped. "How do you know that?" I smiled. "Because you always rub the same spot." She looked down at the tea. Then she whispered, "Thanks." It was the first time she'd ever thanked me. A few days later, Daniel approached me. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you so patient with us?" I thought for a moment. "My grandmother used to tell me something." "What?" "Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about." He looked toward the stairs. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "I judged you." "How?" "I thought maybe you married Edward because his life was easier." I smiled. "My life was already good before Edward." He nodded. "I believe that now." The real test came on a Thursday. Edward was in the backyard trimming the roses. Daniel was fixing a railing. I was inside folding laundry. Then I heard Daniel scream, "Richard!" I dropped the basket. I ran outside. Edward was on the ground. His face was pale. One hand was pressed against his chest. Sophia stood frozen nearby. "Dad!" Daniel was already calling emergency services. I knelt beside Edward. He looked at me. The nitroglycerin. I knew exactly where it was. I ran upstairs. Top drawer. 2nd bottle. I brought it back. Daniel helped support Edward while I gave him the medication. Sophia still hadn't moved. She was trembling. "I don't know what to do." I reached for her hand. "Look at me." She did. "I need you to unlock the front door." She nodded. It gave her something to do. Sometimes panic only needs a job. The ambulance arrived. Edward was rushed to the hospital. He was taken directly to the cardiac unit. I handled the paperwork, his medications, his insurance information, everything. Nearly 20 minutes later, I returned to his room. Before I entered, I heard Sophia's voice. "You changed after she came into your life." Edward sounded exhausted. "Sophia, you never had time for me growing up." His heart monitor began beating faster. "But you have time for her." "Sophia, please." "You replaced Mom." I stepped into the room. "Enough." Sophia turned. I had never spoken to her that way. "I know you're hurting," I said, "but your father is sick." She began crying. "I didn't mean." Intentions don't erase consequences. She looked at Edward. He was struggling to breathe. I lowered my voice. You have spent years carrying anger toward him. I understand why. Her tears fell. But today, you're hurting the person you're terrified of losing. She looked at her father, really looked at him, not as the wealthy businessman, not as the man who had failed her, just as her father, an aging man lying in a hospital bed. Her shoulders collapsed. She covered her mouth, and then she walked out. I found her in the waiting area. She was sitting alone. Her entire body was shaking. I sat beside her. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, I almost made him worse. Yes. She closed her eyes. I didn't mean to. I know. Her voice cracked. I waited my whole life for him to choose me. And there it was. The truth. Not the money. Not the house. Not me. A little girl who had spent 23 years believing she hadn't been enough for her father. I looked at her. Emily. She shook her head. My name is Sophia. I smiled through my tears. I know. She started crying again. I hated seeing him happy with you. I know. I thought if he loved you, there wouldn't be enough love left for me. I took her hand. He never stopped loving you. He wasn't there. No. He missed everything. Yes. Then how can you forgive him? Because forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. She stared at me. It means accepting that people can fail us and still love us. She began sobbing. I kept trying to prove you were fake. I know. Every morning you remembered things about me. Your allergies. My favorite flowers. My coffee. My headaches. She looked at me. Why? I squeezed her hand. Because that's what people do when they care. Her face crumpled. I've been awful to you. You've been hurting. I chose to hurt you. Yes. She lowered her head. And you kept choosing kindness. I didn't answer. Suddenly, she wrapped her arms around me. She cried against my shoulder like a child. Not the sophisticated woman who had arrived with expensive luggage. Not the angry daughter who had ordered me around. Just a little girl who had finally run out of strength. I don't know how to apologize, she whispered. I held her. You just did. An hour later, Edward woke. Sophia walked into his room. She didn't make excuses. She took his hand. I'm sorry, Dad. Edward looked at her. I spent so many years blaming you. His eyes filled with tears. I should have been there. I know. I thought giving you everything meant I was taking care of you. I know. I was wrong. Sophia squeezed his hand. I don't want to lose you. You won't. She leaned over and cried against his shoulder. I stood near the window and watched them. For the first time, there was no competition between us. There didn't need to be. 3 weeks later, Edward came home. His doctor ordered him to slow down. No heavy yard work. No excessive coffee. No stress. Edward hated every instruction. I built entire neighborhoods, he complained. Now I'm not allowed to carry mulch. Sophia laughed. Dad, you're impossible. It was the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her. One Saturday morning, I walked into the kitchen and stopped. Sophia was standing there wearing one of my aprons. There were eggs on the counter, toast, fruit, and several pancakes that looked like they had survived a war. She turned around. I made breakfast. I smiled. You did. I wasn't sure how you liked your eggs. You'll learn. She laughed. I burned the first batch. I noticed. And I may have set off the smoke alarm. I definitely noticed that. Edward walked in. He stared at the kitchen. What happened? Sophia raised her hands. I wanted to make breakfast. For who? For everyone. Edward's eyes filled with tears. Not because breakfast mattered. Because his daughter was finally comfortable in the home she had once treated like a battlefield. Later, Sophia followed me onto the porch. She was holding a small gift bag. I bought you something. You didn't have to. I know. Inside was a beautiful leather bookmark. Engraved on it were words about living 1,000 lives through books. You always lose your bookmarks, she said. I laughed. That is true. She took a breath. I can't give you back that first month. No, I can't erase the things I said. No, but if you'll let me. She looked directly into my eyes. I'd like to spend the rest of my life treating you like the family you deserved from the beginning. I hugged her, not because she had finally apologized, not because she had finally accepted me, but because somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing me as the woman who took her father's attention. She had started seeing me as someone who cared about her. Months passed. Daniel found a new job. Sophia rebuilt her interior design business. Eventually, they moved into their own townhouse. Not because they wanted to escape us, because they were ready to stand on their own. Every Sunday, they came for dinner. Sometimes Sophia cooked. Sometimes I did. Edward always insisted on washing dishes. He was terrible at it. And one Sunday evening, while we were laughing in the kitchen, Sophia accidentally called me Mom. She froze. I'm sorry. I smiled. You don't have to apologize. She smiled back. I wasn't going to. People sometimes ask me whether I ever got revenge. I suppose I did, but not the kind they expect. I didn't humiliate Sophia. I didn't expose her. I didn't force Edward to choose between us. I didn't punish her for the month she spent treating me like a maid. My revenge was much simpler. I stayed. I stayed long enough for her to realize that kindness wasn't weakness. I stayed long enough for her to understand that love wasn't a competition. And I stayed long enough for the frightened little girl inside that angry woman to finally believe she was loved. Because sometimes the family we need isn't the family that never hurts us. Sometimes it's the family that keeps showing up until we finally believe we're worthy of being loved. And sometimes the person who once ordered you to serve her is the same person who eventually holds you in her arms and cries because she finally understands that you never wanted to take her place. You only wanted to make room for her beside you.